Hey, welcome to Quick Take. I'm your host, Susie Tomanchuk, along with my great co-host, James Capps. How are you, James?
I am living the dream. How are you today, Susie?
I'm really good because we are talking about one of my favorite topics in the whole wide world.
I know it. I'm so excited.
It's so great. So we're talking about negotiation because you were, and specifically related to a new job offer and the psychology around should you counter, how do you negotiate, and the research around people feel like they can't.
Right.
So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. What would you want to add?
Well, and I think that I'd talked to some folks and I'd read an interesting article that ultimately shows that when you negotiate your job offer, you don't negatively impact your outcome. There's no statistical evidence that shows when you negotiate, you'll not get the job. But every job offer I've ever been part of, whether it was myself or somebody else, absolutely, that's not the way you think about it. You think that if you even begin to move the dial, that it'll go from a 98% down to a 1%. And it's just really, it's nice to realize that, statistically and research shows that that negotiating does not hurt your ability to get the job.
Well, and it's kind of like that psychology around you've gone through all this time and investment in the interviews and all this, and then you're so want it. Like you're to the end that you just want it to be done and you want to leave with this spirit that I'm a nice person and all of those things. And we don't realize that they, on the other side, deal with people that negotiate on a regular basis. So it's kind of table stakes.
Well, and I think, for most jobs anymore, you rarely get the job offer and negotiate and interview with your boss, right? So at the end of the day, there's a lot of different actors involved, and sure, they all work for the same company, but depending on the size of the company, those people may not even know each other. And so when you stop projecting and just start working the position and the situation you're in independently and try to be objective, you can be more successful.
Yeah. I think that you're going to not like me on this one because I'm going to
how can I not like
stay
you
on your
something?
Tips. I'm not going to stay on your tips because you just made such a good point too, is looking at who's the person in front of you. Are they the decision maker? Are they the person you're going to work for? Are they the recruiter? Even having that conversation with yourself should help you make the choice on what information you ask for and when. Sometimes people start too early because they want to get it over with.
Oh gosh, that's so great. And, I think that, so often when I know on more senior roles, you're talking to either a recruiter or maybe a recruiter that's bringing you in temporarily, or somebody in HR, an internal or an external recruiter. They actually don't know the answers to all those questions. And so that is not the time for you to be asking very specific things about maybe what's the budget look like or things like that. I think if you realize that any good job conversation is going to be more than one conversation, you're going to be better off. We talk about that sense of scarcity. You try to get it all squeezed into one conversation. My advice to people, it's not one of my topics, during job interviews is that conversation. The only thing you want to do during that one conversation is to get to the next one. That's it.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're trying to seal the deal on that one time, that's not how it happens. And I think we all behave as if there's going to be some moment where the person on the other side goes, "Holy Mary, Mother of God, you're it. You're hired. See you at 8:00 tomorrow." and don't take that job if that happens. But that just isn't how it works. It's a process and you need to learn how to play the process.
Yeah. And to that point too, know when you're at the end. Know when you're at the last conversation so that you can really leverage what's important to you and be really clear about what is important to you. What are your floor and ceilings? So, all right, let's get into the tips before we
and I think
geek out too much.
No. I think you were tied right into that first tip, which is, you have to know what is possible, right? And so it's really important that when you go into a conversation that it is not a single, there's not a single number or a single thing that you should be negotiating on. And so often when a job is being presented, they're presenting it with salary. And that is because we know we're money driven. But when there are lots of industries where salaries are capped and everything comes in bonus. maybe that that job has no flexibility in those numbers, but you still want to negotiate things like remote work, things like vacation time, things like sign-on bonuses. There are so many different things that that can be part of this conversation. I think that you need to really appreciate how many levers there really are.
Yeah. And I just had a friend last week. She was going for a C-level position and they gave her an offer verbally. And then she was like, oh, I think I agreed to it. But then
Right.
she got more information and was like, oh, with this bonus, I'm like, she thought she had like taken this perspective of, oh my gosh, I've now lost all my leverage. Where once she understood that there were other components that made her whole, she was like, oh my gosh, I'm right in line and I still have some room to ask for more.
Totally. Chris Voss wrote a great book called Never Split the Difference, which I know that you talked about in your sessions. And I think, and that what we talk about in these negotiations where a job is that you are kind of splitting the difference, but there is a win-win opportunity. And that's what Chris's book talks about, where, if you don't split the difference, you both get what you want. And if you have a mindset that there are other levers, you can be a lot more successful.
Yeah. Right. And even taking, when I went to Harvard, one thing they said is considering the interests of the other person, the other party, before you go in, shift your mindset just a little bit to help you ask the right questions and get to the right end. So understanding that there's a benefit to both sides. It's not just your game. You can you can increase your confidence actually.
Well, you start to realize that you are part of the equation here and they are not just giving, you are giving. And so it is, again, never split the difference, make it a win-win.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right. So what's your second tip?
Well, the second one is so important. And I think you have to understand the industry norms because there are industries where the salary is really set and non-negotiable. There are industries where the bonus is standard and non-negotiable. And then that's where you get to have the conversations about other things. I was interviewing for a role at several of my previous companies. I negotiated to have a professional coach, my executive coach, be covered by the firm. I've never had any pushback from that, but that particular company used executive coaches exclusively as punitive. And so to negotiate that into my contract implied that I needed executive support and coaching right out of the chute. And so
super interesting.
It was so interesting to realize that as I talked to them, it actually would have handicapped me as a new leader at that company. Now, that said, then I negotiated that in a different way. I went with dollars versus that particular item, but it was interesting that that particular company had a norm that was different than perhaps I'd expected. So you have to understand the ecosystem. You have to go in with being flexible and being prepared to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, and get creative how you get that information. Who in your network can give you some insights? Be very exploratory and find ways to get some intel so that you have some of that context.
Yeah, I always like to ask, in what have been the showstoppers for other candidates when it came to negotiating the deal? Because it is when a lot of the firms that I work with and people I work with are bringing in people from other industries. They like to bring in that square peg to the round hole. They want somebody with a different perspective. And that's when the new types of needs and asks are expected. They're very popular on the West Coast right now to have a personal assistant part of the company package. That personal assistant helps manage your life.
Wow.
And you couldn't get that paid for from on an East Coast company. They'd laugh you out the door. But to be able to be aware of that and understand that you can have that conversation and that it's a part of the ecosystem is really powerful.
I think a technique in real time that you can do too is if you ask somebody a question that surprises them, that it was unexpected, that's not normal, they're more likely to just answer it. So if you say, what are some of the other benefits that other people at my level, some of the colleagues appreciate or get, then a lot of times they'll just tell you. some things if they're not expecting
or what are the weird things that people have negotiated for? Well, we do have an executive who gets his car washed every week. Cool.
Yeah.
I want that too. It's about building the rapport. And then I think it's the third one is so key, and it ties well into that, is you've got to negotiate with class and professionally. I don't think there's anybody who's going to win the negotiation by being, rude, being unprofessional, being catty, being condescending. And if you are negotiating with HR, treat them with respect. They may not be your peer, but at the end of the day, they do have some strings to pull. And I do like the idea of having a third party negotiate for you. We know people who do that. That takes you away from the equation, and you don't have any long-term issues with the negotiating. But at the end of the day, even if you do it, or if you have a third party do it, that being professional is just so key.
So important. It's so important. And they'll talk about that experience of working with you. It does on both ways. If you don't ask for what they believe is important to doing your job well, they also want to know that too. So being really thoughtful about the relationship all the way.
I will say that, give you some perspective on how I think this works more often than not, is in situations where I have held my position and negotiated something that was out of the ordinary. And I'm not talking like flying cars or, daily massages. It was just something that was unique. Once I got the job and had a conversation with my now either hiring manager or somebody in my peer ecosystem who was aware of the negotiation, every one of them was jealous that I did that. Every one of them was I wish I had thought of that. That was good. Smart. Yeah. Now I can at least go back and do that. Nobody's ever said you're a jerk for negotiating that.
Yeah.
99% of the time it is professional, perspective of like, wow, I didn't know I could do that either. You taught me something. And that's the kind of outcome you want. You want them to respect you for holding your position, respect you for asking for what you need, but not having done it in such a way that you already got one strike against you.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good to think of it that way. All right, give us the three again.
Okay, the first one, actually, I'm going to do them in a different order because I do think that they're better in this order, which is, know your industry norms, do the research, understand what's possible, understand that this industry does it differently. If you're like a software guy moving from, maybe aerospace into medical, know that there are certain differences and that maybe bonuses are not the same. Know your industry norms. Second one, once you start doing that, shift your mindset. Understand now you have different chips on the table. There are different things you can negotiate. Be aware that maybe the salary is not where you want it to be, but other things are. So know your industry norms, shift your mindset to be aware of what's possible, and then always be professional. Make sure you go into those negotiations knowing that these people are all trying to do a job just like everyone else, and that these are part of the company you'll work with. And if you burn bridges now, it's just that much harder to really execute and be successful at your new role. Yeah.
Such a good topic, such an important topic, as you know, close to my heart because Chris Voss and I are like buddies. So thanks so much, James. Good one.
Great. Thanks.